The sun was setting over the dusty plains of Montana, painting the sky in shades of blood, orange, and deep purple, when Marcus Kane rode into the small town of Cedar Falls for the last time. But this time, he wasn't carrying his guns. This time, he wasn't running from the law. This time, Marcus Kane was a different man entirely. And the story of how he became that man is one of the most incredible tales of human transformation you will ever hear. Let me take you back 20 years to a time when the name Marcus Kane struck fear into the hearts of every sheriff, every banker, and every honest citizen from Texas to Wyoming. Marcus wasn't born bad, but life has a way of pushing people down roads they never intended to travel. And his road was paved with tragedy from the very beginning. Marcus grew up on a small farm outside of Oklahoma City. His father was a hard-working man who believed in honest labor and treating people right. His mother was a gentle woman who taught Sunday school and made the best apple pie in 3 counties. They weren't rich by any means, but they were happy. Marcus had 2 younger sisters, Emily and Rose, and together they lived a simple life filled with love and laughter. But happiness, as Marcus would learn, is a fragile thing that can shatter in an instant. It happened on a cold November evening when Marcus was just 16 years old. A gang of outlaws rode through their property, men with no conscience and no regard for human life. They were being chased by a posse and needed fresh horses. When Marcus's father refused to hand over their animals, the only means the family had to work their land, the leader of the gang drew his pistol without hesitation. Marcus watched from behind the barn as his father fell to the ground. He watched as his mother ran screaming toward her husband, only to meet the same fate. He watched as his sisters tried to flee into the cornfield, their small legs carrying them as fast as they could, but not fast enough. In less than 5 minutes, everything Marcus loved was taken from him. The outlaws rode away without a second glance, leaving behind a devastated farm and a teenage boy whose soul had been ripped apart. That night, something died inside Marcus Kane, and something else was born in its place. Something cold, something angry, something that would spend the next 2 decades making the world pay for what had been taken from him. Marcus buried his family beneath the old oak tree where they used to have picnics on summer afternoons. He stood there until sunrise, his tears drying on his cheeks, his heart turning to stone with each passing hour. And when the sun finally rose, he walked back into the farmhouse, took his father's rifle from above the fireplace, and made a vow. He would find the men who did this. He would make them suffer, and then he would keep going until the world gave him back everything it owed him. The first few years were about survival. Marcus lived on the edges of society, taking odd jobs when he could find them, stealing when he couldn't. He learned how to handle a gun with deadly precision. He learned how to read people, how to spot weakness, how to exploit opportunity. And somewhere along the way, he stopped being a victim and became a predator. By the time he was 22, Marcus Kane had formed his own gang. They called themselves the Shadow Riders, and they terrorized the Western Territories for nearly a decade. Banks, stagecoaches, trains, wealthy ranchers, nobody was safe when the Shadow Riders came to town. Marcus was clever, always planning 3 steps ahead, always knowing when to strike and when to disappear. The law could never catch him because he understood something they didn't. He understood that fear was a more powerful weapon than any gun. But here's the thing about living a life of violence and crime. It doesn't fill the emptiness inside you. It doesn't heal the wounds that drove you to this life in the first place. With every robbery, every confrontation, every narrow escape from the law, Marcus felt himself sinking deeper into darkness. The money meant nothing to him. The reputation was hollow. He was becoming the very thing he had sworn to destroy. A man who brought pain and suffering to innocent people. A man no different from those who had murdered his family. The turning point came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in a small town called Millbrook. The Shadow Riders had planned to rob the local bank, a simple job that should have taken no more than 10 minutes. But things went wrong from the start. A deputy who should have been out on patrol was inside the bank visiting his wife, who worked as a teller. When the robbery began, he went for his gun, and in the chaos that followed, shots were fired. When the smoke cleared, 3 people lay dead on the floor of that bank: the deputy, his wife, and a little girl no more than 8 years old, who had come to the bank with her mother to deposit her birthday money. She had been saving coins in a jar for an entire year, and now she lay motionless in a pool of blood, her jar of coins scattered across the floor. Marcus stood there frozen, his gun still smoking in his hand, and for the first time in years, he saw himself clearly. He saw what he had become. He saw the monster staring back at him from the mirror of that little girl's lifeless eyes. She had blonde hair, just like his sister Emily. She had been wearing a blue dress with white flowers, just like the one Rose used to wear to church. And in that moment, the walls Marcus had built around his heart came crashing down. He ran from that bank and kept running. He abandoned his gang, abandoned his money, abandoned everything. For 3 days he rode through the wilderness without food or water, his mind replaying the scene over and over again. The little girl falling, the coins scattering, the screams, the blood. When his horse finally collapsed from exhaustion, Marcus kept going on foot, stumbling through the desert, until he collapsed himself, ready to die, wanting to die, feeling like death was the only justice he deserved. But death didn't come for Marcus Kane that day. Instead, something else found him lying in the sand beneath the burning sun. An old man named Samuel, a former preacher who had built a small mission in the middle of nowhere, a place where lost souls could find shelter and perhaps find themselves. Samuel loaded Marcus onto his mule and brought him back to the mission, nursed him back to health, and waited patiently for the young outlaw to wake up. When Marcus finally opened his eyes, he looked up at the weathered face of the old preacher and said something he hadn't said since he was 16 years old. He said, "Help me." And with those 2 simple words, the long journey toward redemption began. Samuel didn't preach to Marcus. He didn't lecture him about sin and salvati. He simply gave him work to do. Hard, physical labor that exhausted the body and quieted the mind. Building fences, digging wells, tending to the small garden that provided food for the mission. Day after day, week after week, Marcus worked alongside the old preacher, and slowly, something began to change inside him. It started with small things. The way the sunrise looked over the mountains, the sound of birds singing in the morning, the satisfaction of building something with his own hands instead of taking what others had built. Marcus began to remember what it felt like to be human, to be part of something larger than himself, to have purpose that didn't involve causing pain. One evening, sitting by the fire, Marcus finally told Samuel his story. All of it, the murder of his family, the years of crime, The little girl in the bank, he held nothing back, expecting the old man to recoil in disgust, to send him away, to condemn him to the hell he surely deserved. But Samuel just listened, his eyes filled not with judgment, but with understanding. When Marcus finished, Samuel was quiet for a long time. Then he said something that changed everything. He said, "The man who did those things is dead. He died in the desert. The man sitting before me now has a choice. He can spend the rest of his life being haunted by a ghost, or he can honor the memory of those he wronged by becoming someone worthy of the second chance he's been given." Those words hit Marcus like a thunderbolt. For so long, he had believed that his past defined him, that there was no way back from the darkness. But Samuel was offering him something he had never considered. Not forgiveness, because some things can never be forgiven, but transformation. The possibility of becoming someone new, someone better, someone who could make the world a little brighter instead of darker. It wasn't easy. Redemptio never is. There were nights when the guilt was so overwhelming that Marcus wanted to end his own life. There were moments when the old anger would rise up inside him, demanding release. There were times when he looked in the mirror and still saw the outlaw, the killer, the monster. But he kept working. He kept trying. And slowly, day by day, he built a new life from the ashes of the old one. After 3 years at the mission, Marcus felt ready to face the world again. He said goodbye to Samuel, the man who had saved his life in more ways than one, and set out to make amends however he could. He knew he could never undo the harm he had caused. He knew there would always be families grieving because of his actions, but he also knew that giving up would be the ultimate cowardice, that the only way to honor those who had suffered was to spend every remaining day of his life doing good. Marcus traveled from town to town, taking on whatever work he could find. He helped struggling farmers bring in their harvests. He repaired buildings damaged by storms. He worked in mines and on railroads, sending most of his earnings anonymously to the families of his victims. He never spoke of his past, never sought recognition or gratitude. He simply worked quietly and tirelessly, trying to put more good into the world than he had taken out. Years passed. The name Marcus Kane faded from wanted posters and newspaper headlines. The law assumed he was dead, killed in some unmarked grave in the wilderness. And in a way, they were right. The outlaw was dead. The man who had emerged from the desert was someone entirely different. It was 15 years after his transformation that Marcus finally returned to Cedar Falls, the town where his journey had begun. He was older now, his hair streaked with gray, his face lined with the weight of experience. He rode slowly through the streets where he had once spread terror and not a single person recognized him. He was invisible, just another weathered traveler passing through. But Marcus hadn't come to Cedar Falls for recognition. He had come to visit a small cemetery on the edge of town, where a row of simple headstones marked the graves of those killed in the bank robbery. So many years ago, he stood before them for hours, his hat in his hands, his eyes filled with tears. He no longer tried to hide. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the wind. "I'm so sorry." There was no response, of course. The dead cannot forgive. They cannot grant absolution. But standing there, Marcus realized something important. Redemption was never about being forgiven by others. It was about becoming the kind of person who could forgive themselves. Not forgive as in forget or excuse, but forgive as in accept and move forward. It was about taking the worst parts of yourself and transforming them into something that could help others, that could make a difference, that could leave the world better than you found it. As Marcus rode out of Cedar Falls for the last time, he passed a young man walking along the dusty road. The young man had angry eyes and a set jaw, the look of someone carrying a heavy burden of pain. Marcus recognized that look. He had worn it himself for many years. He stopped his horse and called out to the stranger. "Son, where you headed?" The young man looked up with suspicion. "Nowhere good," he replied. Marcus nodded slowly. "I've been to Nowhere Good. It's a terrible place. Nothing there but more pain." He paused, letting the words sink in. "There's a mission about 2 days' ride south of here. An old man named Samuel runs it. If you're looking for a different road, that might be a good place to start." The young man stared at Marcus for a long moment, something flickering in his eyes. Maybe recognition of a kindred spirit. May be just curiosity. Then he nodded slowly and asked, "How do I find it?" Marcus gave him directions and watched as the young man changed course, turning south instead of continuing north toward whatever destruction awaited him. Maybe he would make it to the mission. Maybe he wouldn't. But at least now he knew there was another option, another path, another possibility. And as Marcus continued on his way, riding toward the setting sun, he felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace, not happiness exactly, because some wounds never fully heal, but peace. The quiet satisfaction of knowing that his life, despite all its darkness, might have made a difference for someone else. That is the story of Marcus Kane, the outlaw who found redemption. Not through some magical moment of divine intervention, not through punishment or reward, but through the slow, difficult, painful process of choosing to be better every single day, through work and service and humility, through accepting his past without being defined by it, through understanding that redemption is not a destination, but a journey, one that never truly ends. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson his story can teach us. No matter how far we have fallen, no matter how dark our past, there is always a path forward. It won't be easy. It will require sacrifice and struggle and more strength than we think we have. But it is there, waiting for us, if only we are brave enough to take the first step.